in the first broadcast, I laid out briefly a very basic understanding of what first fruits constitute. And I'm going to move off and continue in seamless fashion from where we left off in the first installment. I want to encourage you to get hold of the book that we are busy constructing in reference to the present topic. In the book, we go through far greater detail than we would in these broadcasts. I will also encourage you to consult Pastor Thamo Naidu's website and my website for further teachings regarding finance and specifically the matter of first fruits. Now, in ancient agrarian-based Israel, their first fruits was simply the first ripened produce from the crops in their field, or the firstlings of the flocks born to their animals. These were not consumed or used by the farmers for their personal use or needs. They were given to the Lord, directed to the high priest as a representation of the Lord. In doing this, these farmers were saying, God, you are my source. My productivity comes from you. My prosperity comes from you. My providence is yours to give. You are the reason why I am successful. You are the reason why these crops have ripened, why my animals have given birth. All of these blessings come from you. The first fruits were given in acknowledgement that God was the source of all of these things. They were also given as an expression of trust in God, of honor to the Lord, and also of a means to access the grace of God. And I will give some time to further explain some of these things. So if you were a farmer in ancient Israel, it would be relatively easy to determine your first fruit. Whatever came in first, in terms of the harvest, whatever was born first, in terms of firstlings born to animals, that would be given holistically to the Lord. As Israel moved away from an agriculturally based economy to a more monetary or vocationally based economy, people who were working that earned income, that were remunerated for services rendered in the workplace, or if they were business-minded for goods and services provided, they would ask rabbis how should they observe the first fruit principle. And the rabbis suggested, and this suggestion was based on an historical assessment of what farmers in ancient Israel would have offered as a first fruit offering. They said between 1/40th and 1/60th of a typical field, the potential harvest of a particular field was offered to the Lord as a first fruit offering. Now, a modern contemporary counterpart to that would be to offer the first week's income in a typical calendar year. In a 52-week cycle, 1 year, a typical first fruit offering would be the minimum, and I stress the minimum because it's not a requirement. This is a recommended a suggestion, if you would, to offer initially the first week's income to the Lord as a first fruit offering. Again, do not let this determine your first fruit to the Lord. We are simply suggesting this based upon rabbinical suggestions, based upon what rabbis construed as a fitting first fruit, contemporary counterpart compared to what ancient farmers in Israel would have offered. I said to you last time, never let the calculator govern your first fruit, but the measure of light in your spirit. So in a typical calendar year, start by offering the first week's income. But as your faith and measure of light in your spirit grows, so too, I believe, should your faith levels do, so that you can obey God in the first fruit practice at greater or more higher levels. I know of individuals that offer the first month's salary as a first fruit offering. I know of some that offer 50% of their total annual income as a first fruit offering. And yet others still the more, offering 70% and more. So it's not governed by mathematics. It's governed by what you, the giver, considers first within your financial world. When else, apart from offering the first income in a particular calendar year, when else should first fruits also be offered? Now, if you look on your screen, you will see some recommendations. The first point is, as I've said, the first week's wages in a specific calendar year, or 25% of your monthly income, or 2% of annual salary. In the booklet that you could access, I go through great lengths to give practical examples of how one could actually calculate these. Secondly, the first week's salary received in a new job. So when you get a new job, it represents a new field, so to speak. It represents an expression of God's providence, of God's favor upon you. The first time you receive an income from that new job, the first week's income in that new job should be offered as a first fruit to the Lord. If you are salaried monthly, it would be 25% of that first salary. Subsequent salaries in that job, you could just tithe and give offerings off. Thirdly, the first commission received if your remuneration is commission-based, and that basically is self-explanatory. Then the first week's turnover made in a business. This is 25% of monthly turnover or 2% of annual turnover. Then also the entire portion of a salary increase in the specific month of the increase only, once off, that is the portion of the increment in salary. So if your boss calls you in and offers you, let's say, a 2,000 Rand increase in your present salary, in the month in which you receive that additional increase, offer the measure of that increase, that 2,000 Rand, to the Lord as a first fruit offering. This represents your increase in the new bracket of income that you are now earning. And the first occasion that you do receive this, that should be given to the Lord, you're literally saying to God, see how you've blessed me. I regard this increase as coming from your hand. And you literally return that back to the Lord. In subsequent months, you could then give tithes and offerings off your gross earnings. And then lastly, the general principle is this: the first of any form of financial receipt within that calendar year, if that receipt of financial income is perpetual and recurrent. Now, if you anticipate in any domain that income received from some activity will be perpetual or recurrent, will be sustained or ongoing, the very first time you receive income from that activity or that domain should be offered as a first fruit offering. For example, for ministers, it will be the first honorarium received. I have a practice, for example, if I travel to a country to minister for the first time, on my first time ministering in that country, if the host honors me with an honorarium, I don't touch it. I'll bring the entirety of that and offer it to the Lord as a first fruit offering. In the note that you will get, I have scriptures to back all of these statements. So I'll greatly encourage you to please get yourself a copy of the booklet.